The bullet that killed Grace's husband didn't just end his life. It shattered her belief that any man could be trusted with her heart. And she spent the next 3 years building walls higher than the Wyoming mountains that surrounded her ranch. Grace Lawson stood on the porch of her weathered homestead outside Lusk, Wyoming, watching the dust cloud approach from the east. It was September 1882, and the autumn wind carried the scent of sagebrush and the promise of an early winter. Her hand instinctively moved to the rifle propped against the doorframe. Out here, 20 miles from town, visitors were rare and often unwelcome. The rider came into focus as he drew closer. A tall man on a chestnut mare, his hat pulled low against the afternoon sun. Grace's jaw tightened. She didn't need help, didn't want company, and certainly didn't trust strangers who appeared unannounced on her property. The man reined his horse to a respectful distance from the porch. He removed his hat, revealing sandy brown hair and eyes the color of creek water in summer. "Madam, I apologize for the intrusion. Name's Travis Young. I was passing through when I noticed your fence line is down about a quarter-mile back. Looks like you've got cattle wandering toward the open range." Grace studied him with narrowed eyes. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 25 or 26. Her own 23 years felt like 50 sometimes. "I can handle my own fence, Mr. Young. Thank you for the information." She expected him to tip his hat and ride on. Instead, he glanced toward the setting sun, then back at her. "Yes, madam, I'm sure you can. But it'll be dark soon, and those cattle will be halfway to Montana by morning. I've got tools in my pack and a couple hours of daylight left. No charge, no expectations. Just neighborly help." "We're not neighbors," Grace said sharply. "And I don't need charity." Something flickered in Travis's expression, not offense, but understanding. "No, madam, I don't suppose you do. But sometimes accepting help isn't about need. It's about recognizing when refusing it causes more harm than good." Grace wanted to argue, wanted to send him away, but she thought of the 30 head of cattle that represented her entire livelihood. She'd been planning to mend that fence tomorrow, but a storm was rolling in from the west. If the cattle scattered, she'd lose everything. "Fine," she said curtly. "But I'll work alongside you. I won't have anyone saying Grace Lawson can't handle her own ranch." The corner of Travis's mouth lifted slightly. "Wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise, madam." They worked in tense silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. Travis proved efficient with the tools, and Grace grudgingly admitted to herself that he knew what he was doing. He didn't try to take over, didn't question her methods, and when she pointed out a section that needed reinforcing, he simply nodded and followed her lead. By the time they'd driven the last post into the hard earth, darkness had settled over the prairie like a heavy blanket. Stars scattered across the sky in brilliant clusters, and the temperature had dropped 15 degrees. "There's a line shack about 2 miles west," Grace said, coiling the wire they'd used. "You can bed down there for the night." Travis wiped his brow with his sleeve. "Appreciate the offer, madam, but I'll make camp out here. Don't want to impose any further." Grace hesitated. Despite her determination to remain distant, her sense of fairness wouldn't allow her to send the man off into the cold night after he'd spent hours helping her. "There's stew on the stove. You're welcome to a bowl before you go." It was the closest thing to gratitude she could manage, and Travis seemed to understand. "That's mighty kind of you, Mrs. Lawson." "Miss," she corrected automatically, then cursed herself for the admission. "I mean, it's just Grace." If Travis noticed the slip, he had the decency not to comment. He tied his horse to the porch rail and followed her inside, removing his hat again as he crossed the threshold. The cabin was small but tidy, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and simple furnishings that spoke of function over comfort. Grace ladled stew into 2 bowls and set one on the rough-hewn table without ceremony. Travis ate quietly, and Grace found herself watching him from across the table. He had calloused hands and sun-weathered skin that spoke of years working outdoors. There was a scar along his jawline, faint but visible in the lamplight. He caught her looking and met her eyes with a directness that made her look away. "You work a ranch?" she asked, more to fill the silence than from genuine curiosity. "Used to," Travis said. "Family place down in Colorado. Lost it 2 years back when my father died and the bank called in the loans. I've been taking odd jobs since then, moving from place to place." "So you're a drifter?" Grace's tone was flat, almost accusatory. "I suppose that's one way to put it." Travis set down his spoon. "Though I prefer to think I'm a man looking for somewhere to belong. Haven't found it yet." Grace's hand tightened on her own spoon. "Belonging is overrated. All it does is give people the power to hurt you." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Travis didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was gentle. "Someone hurt you pretty bad, I reckon. That's none of your concern." Grace stood abruptly, collecting the bowls. "Thank you for your help with the fence. The line shack is well stocked with firewood and blankets." Travis rose, recognizing the dismissal. "Thank you for the meal, Miss Lawson. I'll be on my way at first light." Grace didn't see him to the door. She stood at the wash basin, scrubbing the bowls with more force than necessary, listening to his footsteps fade as he left the cabin. When she heard his horse moving away toward the line shack, she finally allowed herself to breathe. She didn't need complications. Didn't need a stranger with kind eyes and capable hands disrupting the carefully ordered solitude she'd built. In 3 years since James's death, she'd learned that relying on herself was the only reliable path forward. Men lied, men left, and men got themselves killed doing stupid things in pursuit of glory or gold. That night, Grace lay in her narrow bed and tried not to think about Travis Young. She failed. The storm hit just before dawn, a violent autumn tempest that rattled the shutters and sent rain sheeting across the prairie in gray curtains. Grace rose early as always and made coffee on the wood stove. She told herself she wasn't worried about the stranger in her line shack, but she found herself glancing out the window more often than usual. By mid-morning, the rain had settled into a steady downpour. Grace pulled on her oilskin coat and hat, preparing to check on the livestock when she heard a horse approaching. Travis appeared through the rain, leading his mare and something else, one of her heifers, limping badly. Grace rushed out into the storm. "What happened?" "Found her caught in a wash about a mile north," Travis called over the sound of the rain. "Looks like she tried to cross during the first surge and got swept into some rocks. Her front legs hurt, but I don't think it's broken." Together they got the heifer into the barn. The animal was trembling, her coat matted with mud and her left foreleg swollen and tender. Grace ran her hands expertly over the injury, her fingers probing gently while Travis held the heifer steady. "You're right," Grace said. "Badly bruised, possibly torn muscle, but the bone's intact. She'll need to be confined and treated for a few weeks. You've done this before." It wasn't a question. "My father was a ranch hand, taught me everything he knew before he died." Grace straightened, pushing wet hair from her face. "I'll need to make a poultice, keep the swelling down." "I'll help." Travis's voice brooked no argument. They worked through the morning and into the afternoon, the storm continuing unabated outside. Travis proved surprisingly knowledgeable about animal medicine, and Grace found herself actually conversing with him, sharing techniques and discussing the best treatments. It was the most she'd talked to anyone in months. "Where'd you learn animal doctoring?" she asked as they finished wrapping the heifer's leg. "My mother," Travis said. She was the one who really ran our ranch. My father got the credit, but she was the brains behind it. She could cure just about any animal ailment you could name. She sounds remarkable. She was. Travis's expression darkened. She died when I was 17. Fever took her in 3 days. After that, my father sort of gave up. Stopped caring about the ranch, stopped caring about much of anything. When he passed, I wasn't surprised to find out we were drowning in debt. He'd been borrowing against the land for years. Grace felt an unwelcome twinge of sympathy. I'm sorry. Long time ago now. Travis moved to rinse his hands in the bucket of clean water. What about you? How'd you end up running a ranch on your own? Grace's walls slammed back into place. That's a long story. Storm's not letting up anytime soon. Travis gestured toward the barn doors where rain continued to pour. Seems like we've got time. Grace wanted to refuse, wanted to retreat behind her familiar barriers. But something in Travis's steady gaze, in the patient way he waited without pushing, made the words come despite herself. I was married, she said quietly. James Lawson. We'd been wed for just over a year when he decided he wanted to try his hand at gold prospecting. I begged him not to go. Told him we had everything we needed right here. But James always wanted more, always wanted something bigger and better. She paused, the memories sharp as broken glass. He went to the Black Hills in South Dakota. 3 weeks later, I got word that there'd been an altercation at his claim. Some dispute over boundaries. James pulled a gun, the other man was faster. They buried him in Deadwood. Travis's expression was somber. That's a hard thing to carry. The hardest part wasn't that he died, Grace said, the admission costing her. The hardest part was that he left. That he looked at what we had, looked at me, and decided it wasn't enough. Decided I wasn't enough. That wasn't about you. Travis's voice was firm. That was about a man who didn't know the value of what he had until it was too late to matter. Grace laughed, a bitter sound. You don't know that. You didn't know James, didn't know our marriage. No, Travis agreed. But I know that anyone who'd leave you alone on a homestead to chase fool's gold wasn't seeing clearly. The words, spoken with such simple conviction, hit Grace harder than any elaborate declaration could have. She turned away, busying herself with checking the heifer's water. I should get back to the house, she said. Make something for supper, Grace. Travis's use of her first name stopped her. I'm sorry for what happened to you, and I understand why you'd be wary of trusting anyone, especially a stranger who showed up on your land unannounced. But not every man is like your husband. Some of us actually mean what we say. So you keep telling me. Grace moved toward the barn door. Come up to the house in an hour. Staying out here all day in wet clothes is a good way to catch pneumonia. She left before he could respond, hurrying through the rain to her cabin. Once inside, she stripped off her wet coat and stood by the stove, letting the heat seep into her bones. Her hands trembled as she prepared vegetables for stew, and she told herself it was just from the cold. But deep down, she knew better. Travis Young was getting under her skin, slipping past defenses she'd thought were impenetrable. And that terrified her more than any storm ever could. The rain continued for 3 days. Travis stayed in the line shack, but he came to the main house each morning to help with chores, check on the injured heifer, and share meals that gradually grew less silent. Grace found herself looking forward to his arrival, even as she cursed herself for the weakness. He told her stories about his travels, about the people he'd met and the places he'd seen. He'd worked ranches in Colorado, Nebraska, and Montana, had spent a season as a wrangler for a cattle drive, had even tried his hand at marshaling in a small Kansas town before deciding it wasn't for him. Too much politics, he said, sitting at her table on the 3rd evening. Everyone wanting you to take sides, to look the other way for the right people. I couldn't stomach it. So what are you looking for? Grace asked. What would make you stop drifting? Travis was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup between his hands. Honestly, a place where I matter, where the work I do means something beyond just earning tomorrow's meal, and maybe, if I'm lucky, someone to share it with. Grace's heart kicked against her ribs. That's a tall order in this territory. Most folks are just trying to survive. Maybe, Travis said, but surviving isn't the same as living. My mother used to say that if you're not working towards something that matters, you're just waiting to die. The words resonated with Grace in a way she didn't want to acknowledge. She'd been surviving for 3 years, going through the motions of running her ranch, but had she been living? When was the last time she'd felt anything beyond determination to make it through another day? Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman, Grace said finally. She was. Travis met her eyes. She also used to say that the bravest thing a person could do was try again after they'd been hurt. That giving up on happiness because you'd been disappointed once was like refusing to plant crops because one harvest failed. I'm not giving up on happiness, Grace protested. I'm just being realistic. People leave, Travis. They die, they disappoint, they choose something else over you. That's just how it is. Maybe, Travis leaned forward. Or maybe you've been so focused on protecting yourself from getting hurt again that you've stopped seeing the difference between caution and prison. The words struck too close to home. Grace stood abruptly. I think it's time you headed back to the line shack. Storm's letting up. Travis rose without argument, but his expression was troubled. Grace, I didn't mean to upset you. You didn't, she lied. I'm just tired. It's been a long few days. He nodded, collected his hat, and headed for the door. But before he left, he turned back. For what it's worth, I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met, but strength doesn't have to mean being alone. After he left, Grace sat in her chair by the fire and let herself cry for the first time in months. She cried for James, for the naive girl she'd been when she married him, and for the frightened woman she'd become. She cried because Travis was right, and because admitting that meant facing 3 years of self-imposed isolation. Most of all, she cried because part of her desperately wanted to believe that not all men were like James, that some men actually kept their word and stayed when things got difficult. And that possibility, after so long convincing herself otherwise, was both terrifying and intoxicating. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The storm finally passed. Grace woke with a sense of determination. She'd spent half the night thinking, and she'd come to a decision. She couldn't promise Travis anything, couldn't guarantee that she was ready to trust again. But maybe she could stop pushing him away. Maybe she could give herself permission to find out who he really was. She made a larger breakfast than usual: eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy. When Travis arrived to help with morning chores, she invited him in. You cooked all this? He looked surprised. Don't get used to it, Grace said, trying to sound stern but failing. I just figured you'd earned a decent meal for all the help you've given. They ate together, the silence between them more comfortable than it had been. After breakfast, they worked side by side, checking the fence line that had weathered the storm, tending to the livestock and examining the injured heifer, whose leg was showing signs of improvement. She's healing well, Travis observed. You did good work. We did good work, Grace corrected, surprising herself. I couldn't have gotten her into the barn by myself. Travis glanced at her, something like hope in his expression. Does this mean you're getting used to having help around? Grace hesitated, then decided honesty was the only way forward. I don't know what it means. I'm not good at this, Travis. I'm not good at letting people in or trusting that they'll stay, but I'm willing to try if you're patient with me. The smile that crossed Travis's face was like sunrise. "I can be patient." Over the following weeks, a cautious friendship developed between them. Travis made no assumptions, pushed for nothing beyond what Grace was willing to give. He moved into the bunkhouse at her suggestion, taking on the role of ranch hand without any formal agreement about wages or duration. They fell into an easy routine. Morning started with coffee and planning the day's work. They'd separate for some tasks, work together on others. Travis proved invaluable during the fall roundup, his experience with cattle evident in every efficient movement. Grace found herself relying on his judgment, asking his opinion on decisions she'd always made alone before. Evenings were spent on the porch or by the fire, depending on the weather. They talked about everything and nothing: childhood memories, dreams for the future, books they'd read, and places they'd seen. Grace learned that Travis had a dry sense of humor and a gift for storytelling. He learned that beneath her prickly exterior, Grace was lonely, wounded, and desperately afraid of being hurt again. One evening in late October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Travis asked the question that had clearly been on his mind for days. "What would you say if I asked permission to court you properly?" Grace's breath caught. She'd known this moment was coming, had felt the growing tension between them, the unspoken feelings that colored every interaction. But hearing the words still sent her heart racing. "I'd say I'm scared," she admitted. "I'd say that every instinct I've developed over the past 3 years is screaming at me to say no, to protect myself." "But," Travis prompted gently, "but I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of being alone. And I'm tired of pretending I don't care about you when the truth is, I've come to care a great deal." Grace turned to face him fully. "I can't promise I'll be easy to love, Travis. I've got walls built pretty high and they're not coming down overnight. I'm not asking for easy." Travis reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "I'm just asking for a chance to show you that not all men break their promises, that some of us know the value of what we've got and don't go looking for something better." Grace looked at their joined hands, at the calluses they'd both earned through hard work, at the way his fingers curled protectively around hers. It would be so simple to pull away, to retreat to the safety of solitude. But simple wasn't always right. "All right," she said softly. "You can court me. But we take it slow." Travis's smile was brilliant. "As slow as you need." He didn't try to kiss her, didn't push for more than she'd offered. He simply held her hand and watched the sunset with her, and that patience meant more to Grace than any grand gesture could have. The courtship was unconventional by town standards. There were no church socials or formal visits under watchful chaperones. Instead, there were stolen moments of tenderness woven into the fabric of ranch work. Travis leaving wildflowers on the porch rail in the morning. Grace making his favorite pie and claiming it was just because she had extra apples. Hands brushing as they worked together, touches that lingered a moment longer than necessary. They went to Lusk together one Saturday in November for supplies. It was Grace's first visit to town in months, and she felt self-conscious walking down the main street with Travis at her side. People stared and whispered, and Grace's spine stiffened defensively. "Ignore them," Travis murmured. "They're just surprised to see you're still among the living." "They're judging," Grace said tightly. "Wondering what I'm doing with a drifter, probably thinking I'm dishonoring James's memory." "Are you?" Travis asked quietly. "Dishonoring his memory, I mean." Grace considered the question seriously. "No," she said finally. "James made his choices, and they had nothing to do with honoring me or our marriage. I think I'm finally done letting his choices dictate mine." At the general store, they encountered Martha Hendricks, the town's most notorious gossip. The older woman's eyes lit up with curiosity when she saw them together. "Grace Lawson, as I live and breathe. It's been an age since we've seen you in town. And who's this fine gentleman?" "Travis Young, madam," Travis said politely, tipping his hat. "I'm working Miss Lawson's ranch." "Working it, are you?" Martha's tone dripped with insinuation. "Well, isn't that convenient?" Grace felt her temper flare, but Travis's hand found the small of her back, steady and calming. "Very convenient," he said pleasantly. "Miss Lawson runs one of the finest operations in the territory. I'm lucky to have found the position." His matter-of-fact tone seemed to deflate Martha's attempts at scandal. They completed their shopping and left the store, but Grace was fuming. "Busybody old witch," she muttered as they loaded supplies into the wagon. "She'll have us married and divorced by tomorrow if her tongue wags as fast as usual. Let her talk." Travis helped her onto the wagon seat and settled beside her. "People are going to gossip no matter what we do. We could be perfect saints and they'd find something to criticize. All that matters is what we know to be true." "Which is what?" Grace asked. "That you're a strong, honorable woman who deserves happiness. That I'm a man who's trying his best to be worthy of your trust. And that whatever's growing between us is nobody's business but ours." Grace felt something in her chest loosen, a tightness she hadn't even realized she was carrying. "You're good with words, Travis Young. Only when I mean them." He took up the reins and guided the horses toward home. The first snow fell in early December, blanketing the prairie in white silence. Travis spent a long day reinforcing the barn roof and ensuring the livestock had adequate shelter for winter. When he finally came in for supper, he was exhausted, his movements slower than usual. Grace had stew waiting and a fire roaring in the hearth. As they ate, she noticed him favoring his left shoulder, rolling it as if working out stiffness. "You're hurt," she said, "just sore. Got knocked into a post by one of the steers. Nothing serious. Let me see." Grace rose and moved behind him. Travis hesitated, then unbuttoned his shirt enough to slip his left arm out. Grace could see the bruise already forming across his shoulder blade, dark and angry looking. Without thinking, she gently probed the area, her fingers testing for broken bones. "You're lucky it's not dislocated," she said. "But you've got some deep bruising. I'll make a poultice." As she worked, mixing herbs and warm water into a paste, she was acutely aware of Travis's presence, of the intimacy of touching his bare skin. Her hands trembled slightly as she applied the poultice, and when Travis caught her wrist gently, she froze. "Grace," he said softly, "can I ask you something?" "All right." "Why did you really let me stay after that first night? The fence was fixed. I'd paid back any debt of kindness." "You could have sent me away, but you didn't." "Why?" Grace's throat tightened. "Because when you rode away toward the line shack that night, I felt something I hadn't felt since before James died. I felt lonely. Not alone, I'd been alone for 3 years. Lonely. There's a difference." Travis turned on his chair to face her. "What's the difference? Alone is a fact. Lonely is a choice." Grace met his eyes. "For 3 years I chose to be alone rather than risk being lonely again. Then you showed up, spent a few hours fixing my fence and eating my stew, and suddenly alone wasn't enough anymore. I was furious with you for that. And now," Travis asked, "now I'm grateful. Terrified but grateful." Grace set aside the bowl of poultice. "You've been patient with me, Travis. More patient than I deserve. You've let me set the pace, never pushed for more than I was ready to give. That means everything." Travis reached up and cupped her face with his good hand, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I'd wait forever if that's what you needed. But I'm hoping you'll tell me we don't have to wait quite that long." Grace's heart hammered in her chest. For 3 years, she'd avoided this moment, this vulnerability. But looking into Travis's eyes, seeing nothing but honesty and affection, she made her decision. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, testing, but Travis responded with a gentleness that made her ache. His hand slid into her hair, cradling the back of her head, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Grace," Travis whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "I'm still scared," she admitted, "but I don't want to be scared anymore. I don't want to let fear keep me from this from you. Fear is normal. It means you're brave enough to try again." Travis pressed his forehead to hers. "I swear to you I'm not going anywhere. This ranch, this life with you, it's everything I've been searching for. You're everything I've been searching for." "You say that now," Grace said, old doubts surfacing. "But what if it's not enough? What if someday you wake up and decide you want something different, something more?" Travis pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "Look around, Grace. Really look. This isn't some temporary stopping point for me. I've repaired every fence, reinforced every structure, planned for spring planting." "Does that sound like a man who's planning to leave?" Grace realized he was right. Over the past 2 months, Travis hadn't just been helping with routine maintenance. He'd been improving the property, investing in its future. Their future. "I've been so caught up in protecting myself that I didn't see what was right in front of me," she said wonderingly. "You're already building a life here." "I'm trying to build a life with you," Travis corrected. "If you'll have me." Grace kissed him again, longer this time, pouring 3 years of loneliness and fear and desperate hope into the touch. When they broke apart, she was trembling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll have you." Travis's smile could have lit the whole prairie. He stood, drawing her with him, and wrapped his arms around her waist. They stood there in the firelight, holding each other, and Grace felt something she'd thought was lost forever: peace. Winter settled over the ranch in earnest, bringing howling winds and deep snow. Travis moved into the main house officially, and they fell into the rhythm of a true partnership. They woke together, worked together, planned together. Grace found herself laughing more than she had in years, found joy in small moments: Travis's terrible singing as he did chores, the way he always made sure her coffee was ready before she woke, the feeling of his arm around her shoulders as they watched snowfall from the porch. On Christmas Eve, they made the trip to Lusk for midnight service. The church was warm with candlelight and packed with families. Grace felt Travis's hand in hers as they sang carols, and when Reverend Thompson spoke about redemption and second chances, she felt tears prick her eyes. After the service, as they walked back to the wagon, Travis stopped her under the starlit sky. "Grace Lawson, I know we said we'd take things slow, and I meant that, but I need you to know something." "What is it?" "I love you. I've loved you since that first night when you stood on your porch with a rifle, suspicious and guarded and absolutely magnificent. I've loved you more every day since, and I'm going to love you for the rest of my life, however long you'll let me." Grace's breath misted in the cold air. 3 months ago, those words would have sent her running. Now they settled into her heart like a missing piece clicking into place. "I love you too," she said, and the admission felt like freedom. "I fought it, tried to convince myself I was just lonely or grateful for the help. But the truth is, I love you, Travis Young. I love your patience and your kindness and the way you fixed my fence before you even knew my name. I love the life we're building together." Travis kissed her there on the main street of Lusk, with snow beginning to fall and church bells ringing in the distance. It was impulsive and improper, and Grace didn't care one bit. When they finally broke apart, Travis was grinning. "Marry me." "What?" Grace laughed. "Marry me." "I know it's fast, I know we said slow, but Grace, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Marry me." Grace thought about objections, about what people would say, about whether it was too soon. Then she thought about the past 3 months, about how Travis had proven himself in 100 small ways every single day, about how he'd taken her broken pieces and gently, patiently helped her put them back together. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were married in January 1883, in the same church where Travis had proposed. It was a small ceremony, just a handful of neighbors, Reverend Thompson and old Martha Hendricks, who cried through the entire service and claimed she'd known from the start that they were meant for each other. Grace wore a simple blue dress she'd made herself, and Travis wore his best suit, borrowed from the banker. None of that mattered. What mattered was the way Travis's voice shook when he said his vows, the way Grace didn't hesitate for even a moment when promising to love and honor him. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Travis kissed her with such tenderness that Grace felt her last walls crumble. She was married again, but this time it felt completely different. This time, she was choosing a partner, not looking for someone to complete her. This time, she was whole on her own, and Travis made her even stronger. The wedding breakfast was held at the hotel, a cheerful affair with more food than necessary and toasts that grew increasingly emotional as the whiskey flowed. When it was time to head home, their wagon was loaded with gifts preserves from Mrs. Chen, who ran the boarding house, a hand-carved picture frame from the carpenter, even a bottle of wine from Martha Hendricks. As they rode back to the ranch, Grace leaned against Travis's shoulder. "We did it. We're actually married." "Having second thoughts already," Travis teased. "Not one." Grace looked up at him. "I was just thinking about how different this feels from last time. When I married James, I felt like I was stepping into a story someone else had written. With you, I feel like we're writing the story together. I like that." Travis kissed the top of her head. "What should happen next in our story?" "Well, we've got a ranch to run. Spring will be here before we know it, and we'll need to plan for calving season. We should probably think about expanding the herd, maybe adding some horses." Grace paused. "And eventually, if we're blessed, maybe a family." "Eventually?" Travis raised an eyebrow. "What constitutes eventually?" Grace laughed. "Let me get used to being married first. We've got time." But time had a way of moving faster than expected. Spring came with its endless work, calving, branding, repairing winter damage. Summer brought the heat and the hard work of haying. Through it all, Grace and Travis worked as one, their partnership strengthening with each challenge they faced together. In late summer, Grace began to suspect she might be pregnant. She kept the suspicion to herself at first, afraid to hope. But when her symptoms persisted, she finally saw the doctor on one of their trips to town. Dr. Morrison confirmed what she'd suspected. She was going to have a baby, due in late winter. Grace was quiet on the ride home, trying to process her feelings. She wanted this child desperately, but fear crept in too. What if something went wrong? What if she couldn't be a good mother? What if Travis felt trapped by this responsibility? "You're awful quiet," Travis said as they neared the ranch. "Doc Morrison give you bad news?" "No." Grace took a deep breath. "Good news, actually. At least I think it's good news. Travis, I'm pregnant." The wagon lurched as Travis pulled the horses to an abrupt stop. He turned to her, his expression stunned. "Pregnant? You're sure?" "Doctor's sure. Baby should come in late February, early March." For a moment, Travis just stared at her. Then he let out a whoop of joy so loud it startled the horses. He swept Grace into his arms, kissing her soundly. "This is incredible. We're going to have a baby." His unrestrained joy eased Grace's fears. "You're happy about this?" "Happy, Grace. I'm over the moon. We're going to be parents." Travis's grin was infectious. "We need to start preparing. The baby will need a cradle. We should add another room to the house, and Travis." Grace put her hand on his chest, laughing. "We have time. The baby's not due for months yet." But Travis was already making plans, talking excitedly about nurseries and cribs and baby clothes. His enthusiasm was contagious, and by the time they reached home, Grace found herself caught up in his excitement. That evening they sat on the porch and talked about the future. Travis had his arm around Grace, his hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "I'm scared," Grace admitted. "What if I'm not a good mother? You're going to be an amazing mother." Travis's voice was certain. "You're strong and capable, and you care deeply about the things that matter to you. Our child is lucky to have you." "And you," Grace said, "you're going to be a wonderful father." "I'll certainly try." Travis was quiet for a moment. "My own father wasn't much of a role model, especially after my mother died. But I figure we learn from what we lived through, right? I know what kind of father I don't want to be. That's a start." Grace twisted to look at him. "You're already better than James would have been." He would have seen a child as a burden, another responsibility tying him down. You see it as a blessing. It is a blessing. You both are. Travis kissed her temple. "I meant what I said in my wedding vows, Grace. For better or worse, richer or poorer, I'm here and I'm not going anywhere." The words, which once would have made her flinch, now filled her with warmth. She finally believed him. Autumn passed in a flurry of preparation. Travis built a cradle from pine wood, carving delicate patterns into the headboard. Grace sewed baby clothes and blankets, her stitches careful and precise. They added a small nursery to the cabin, working together to create a space filled with love and anticipation. As winter returned and Grace's belly grew, they settled into a new rhythm. Travis took on more of the heavy work, insistent that Grace rest and take care of herself. Grace, though occasionally frustrated by her limitations, appreciated his care. "You know I'm pregnant, not broken," she said one evening as Travis insisted she stay inside while he checked on the livestock in a snowstorm. "I know." Travis pulled on his heavy coat. "But I also know that you're carrying the most precious thing in my world, and I'm not taking any chances." "Humor me." Grace couldn't argue with that logic. She watched from the window as he disappeared into the swirling snow, one hand resting on her prominent belly. The baby kicked, as if reminding her of its presence. "Your father's a good man," she murmured to her unborn child. "One of the best." "I fought so hard against believing that, against trusting him. But he never gave up on me, never stopped proving himself. I hope you inherit his patience and his kindness." The baby kicked again, and Grace smiled. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something to look forward to. In late February, as predicted, Grace went into labor. The timing was terrible. A blizzard had been raging for 2 days, making it impossible to fetch the doctor from town. Travis would have to help deliver the baby himself. "I can do this," he said, more to himself than to Grace. "We can do this." Labor was long and difficult. Grace had always prided herself on her strength, but bringing a child into the world tested her in ways she'd never imagined. Through it all, Travis was there holding her hand, wiping her brow, offering encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation. "I can see the head," Travis said after what felt like an eternity. "Grace, you're doing it. Just a little more." With a final effort, Grace pushed, and suddenly the room filled with the sound of a baby's cry. Travis wrapped the infant in clean cloth, his hands shaking, and placed the tiny bundle in Grace's arms. "A boy," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." Grace looked down at the red, wrinkled face of her newborn and felt her heart expand impossibly. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making his displeasure at being born into a cold Wyoming winter very clear. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "Welcome to the world." Travis sat beside her on the bed, his arm around them both. "He's perfect. "You're perfect." "We need to name him," Grace said. She looked at Travis. "Any ideas?" "What about William?" Travis suggested. "After my grandfather, he was a good man, taught me about honor and keeping your word." "William Young." Grace tested the name. "I like it. What about a middle name you choose?" Travis said. "You did the hard work." Grace thought for a moment. "William James, after your grandfather and my father, both good men who deserve to be remembered." Travis nodded, his eyes suspiciously bright. "William James Young. It's a strong name." The blizzard finally cleared 3 days later, allowing them to get word to Dr. Morrison, who made the journey out to check on mother and baby. He declared them both healthy, if exhausted, and complimented Travis on his successful delivery. "You did good work here, young man," the doctor said. "Not every father could keep his head in a situation like that." "I didn't have a choice," Travis said, looking at Grace and William. "They're my whole world. Failure wasn't an option." In the weeks that followed, Grace and Travis adjusted to parenthood. William was a hungry, demanding baby who kept them up at all hours. They took turns walking him, feeding him, changing his diapers. Grace was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced, but she was also happier than she'd ever imagined possible. One night, as she nursed William in the rocking chair Travis had made, she looked up to find her husband watching her with an expression of such love it made her breath catch. "What is it?" she asked softly. "I was just thinking about the first time I saw you," Travis said. "Standing on that porch with your rifle, ready to send me packing. If someone had told me then that less than 2 years later we'd be married with a son, I'd have thought they were crazy." "I would have thought they were crazy too." Grace smiled down at William, who had fallen asleep at her breast. "I was so determined not to let anyone in, so certain that being alone was safer than risking getting hurt again." "What changed?" Travis asked. Grace thought about the question carefully. "You didn't just tell me I could trust you. You showed me day after day in 100 small ways. You were patient when I pushed you away. You were steady when I was afraid. You proved that not all men are like James, that some men actually mean what they say." "I did mean it. I meant every word." Travis came to kneel beside the rocking chair. "And I still do. You and William, you're everything to me." "I know." Grace reached out to cup his cheek. "That's what changed." "I finally let myself believe it." Spring arrived, bringing renewal and new life to the ranch. The cattle thrived, the crops flourished, and William grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, curious baby who delighted in exploring his world. Grace marveled at how quickly time passed, how her son's personality emerged more each day. One afternoon in May, as Grace hung laundry while William napped in a basket nearby, Martha Hendricks's wagon appeared on the road. Grace suppressed a sigh. She'd grown more tolerant of the older woman's nosiness, but Martha's visits were still exhausting. "Grace Young," Martha called as she climbed down from her wagon. "I came to see that handsome boy of yours." "He's sleeping," Grace said, finishing pinning a sheet to the line. "But you're welcome to wait if you'd like." Martha settled on the porch, accepting a glass of water. "You look happy," she observed. "Marriage agrees with you." "It does." Grace sat beside her. "Travis is a good husband and father." "I know some people had their doubts when you married him so quickly." Martha's tone was carefully neutral. "A drifter with no family, no land of his own. But I told everyone who'd listened that Travis Young was quality, and you'd made a fine choice." Grace bit back a smile, remembering how Martha had been one of the most vocal gossips about their relationship. "Did you now?" "Of course," Martha said, apparently believing her own revised history. "I could tell from the start that boy was devoted to you. The way he looked at you like you hung the moon and stars, that's not something you can fake." "No," Grace agreed quietly. "It's not." William woke with a cry, and Grace retrieved him from his basket. Martha cooed over the baby, declaring him the most beautiful child in the territory. After she left, Grace carried William to the barn where Travis was working. "Martha Hendricks stopped by," she said. "Apparently, she's been supporting our relationship from the very beginning." Travis laughed. "Is that so? I seem to remember her telling half the town that you'd lost your mind." Selective memory is a wonderful thing. Grace handed William to Travis, who cradled the baby with practiced ease. "But you know what? I don't care what Martha or anyone else thinks anymore. We know the truth that we built something real, something worth having." "That we did." Travis bounced William gently, earning a gurgle of delight. "Speaking of which, I've been thinking about the future. The ranch is doing well, better than I expected. What would you say to buying some more land, maybe expanding into horses?" "I'd say that sounds like a man planning to stick around long term." Grace moved to stand beside him, watching their son. "More than long term, forever." Travis met her eyes over William's head. "This is my home now, Grace. Not because of the land or the ranch, but because of you and this little guy. You're my family. That's everything I ever wanted." Grace leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, hearing the steady beat of his heart. Once, she'd thought family meant vulnerability, meant giving someone the power to destroy you. Now she understood that family meant strength, meant having people who stood beside you no matter what came. "Forever sounds good to me," she said. The years that followed were marked by both challenges and joys. They expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and starting a small horse breeding operation. William grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around and pestering his mother with endless questions. When William was 3, Grace found herself pregnant again. This time there was no fear, only excitement. The pregnancy was easier, and in November 1886 their daughter was born. They named her Sarah Grace, and William was fascinated by his tiny sister. "She's so small," he said, peering into the cradle with wide eyes. "Was I that small?" "You were," Travis confirmed. "Hard to believe now, considering how much trouble you cause." "I don't cause trouble," William protested. "I just explore." Grace and Travis exchanged amused glances. Their son's exploring often led to minor disasters, but his enthusiasm was endearing. With 2 children, the cabin felt small, so they spent the winter planning an addition. By spring, they'd added 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen. The expanded house felt like a true home, filled with the sounds of children's laughter and the warmth of family. Grace sometimes caught herself marveling at how far she'd come from that bitter, lonely woman who'd pointed a rifle at a stranger on her porch. She'd been so certain she knew everything about life, about love, about what she needed to be safe. Travis had proven all her certainties wrong, not through grand gestures or pretty words, but through consistent, daily proof that he was a man of his word. One evening in summer, after the children were asleep, Grace and Travis sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. It was the same porch where she'd first met him, where he'd asked to court her, where they'd shared countless conversations and stolen kisses. "Do you ever think about that first day?" Grace asked. "When you rode up and told me about my fence all the time." Travis took her hand. "I think about how close I came to riding past. I'd been heading to Montana, planning to look for work up there. But something made me stop when I saw that broken fence. Call it fate or instinct or just dumb luck. I'm glad you stopped." Grace laced her fingers through his. "Even though I was horrible to you, you were cautious. You'd been hurt and you were protecting yourself. I understood that. You were so patient with me. Even when I pushed you away, even when I tried to convince myself I didn't need anyone, you just kept showing up, kept proving yourself." Grace turned to him. "Why? Why didn't you just move on to someone easier?" Travis was quiet for a long moment. Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were worth the wait. There was something in your eyes, this mix of strength and pain that just pulled at me. I wanted to be the one to prove to you that not all men are worthless, that some of us are capable of keeping our promises. You've certainly done that, Grace smiled. You've given me everything, Travis. A partnership, a family, a life I never thought I'd have again. You proved that some men really are worth the risk. And you taught me that home isn't a place, it's people who matter. It's work that means something. It's building a future with someone you love. Travis pulled her close. You gave me purpose when I was drifting. You gave me a reason to put down roots. They sat together in comfortable silence as stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. From inside the house came the sound of William calling for water and Sarah beginning to fuss. Travis started to rise, but Grace held him back for just a moment. I love you, Travis Young, more than I ever thought possible. Thank you for not giving up on me. Never, Travis said firmly. Not then, not now, not ever. They went inside together to tend to their children, partners in every sense of the word. Grace's heart was full in a way she'd thought was lost forever. She'd learned that second chances weren't weakness, they were brave. That trusting again after being hurt wasn't foolish, it was courageous. And that some men, rare and precious, were absolutely worth the risk. As the years continued to pass, the Young family became a fixture in the Lusk community. Travis served on the town council, helping to make decisions about roads and schools. Grace hosted quilting circles and helped organize the church social. William and Sarah grew, joined eventually by a third child, a boy they named Thomas, born in 1889. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Travis's horse breeding operation gained a reputation for quality, and buyers came from as far as Cheyenne to purchase their stock. Grace's cattle operation remained profitable even during hard years when other ranchers struggled. But more than the financial success, it was the strength of their partnership that defined their legacy. Other women in the territory began to notice how Travis treated Grace as an equal, how he valued her opinions and consulted her on major decisions. It was uncommon for the time, and it started quiet conversations about what marriage could be. One summer day, when Grace was in town buying supplies, she encountered a young woman named Rebecca standing by a wagon, looking lost and afraid. The woman's dress was worn and there was a bruise on her arm poorly hidden by her sleeve. "Are you all right?" Grace asked gently. Rebecca started, then forced a smile. "I'm fine, thank you." But Grace recognized that forced cheerfulness, that determination to pretend everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. It was how she'd looked in the final months of her marriage to James, when disappointment had become her constant companion. "I'm Grace Young," she said. "My ranch is about 20 miles east of town. If you ever need help for any reason, you can come there. No questions asked." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "That's kind of you, but my husband, I know about difficult husbands," Grace interrupted softly. "I was married before to a man who valued his own dreams more than our life together. It's not the same as what you're facing, I think, but I understand feeling trapped." "How did you get free?" Rebecca whispered. "He made choices that ended the marriage. Then I spent 3 years alone, convinced I'd never trust anyone again, until I met a man who was patient enough to prove that not all men are the same." Grace took Rebecca's hand briefly. "You have options, even when it feels like you don't. Remember that." When Grace returned home and told Travis about the encounter, his expression was troubled. "You think her husband is violent?" "I know he is. I saw the fear in her eyes." Grace began unpacking supplies. "I told her she could come here if she needed help." "Good." Travis began helping her put things away. We've got room in the bunkhouse if she needs somewhere to stay, and I can ask around town, see if anyone's hiring. She might need work. This was why Grace loved him, she thought. His first instinct was always to help, to find solutions rather than making excuses. 2 weeks later, Rebecca appeared at their door with nothing but a carpet bag and determination in her eyes. She stayed with them for 3 months, helping Grace with the house and children while Travis discreetly made arrangements for her to start a new life. Eventually, she moved to town, where she found work as a seamstress and began to rebuild her confidence. Years later, Rebecca would tell anyone who'd listen about the woman who'd offered her a lifeline and the cowboy who'd helped her take it. She became part of the extended community that orbited the young ranch, friends who were really family. In 1895, when William was 12, Sarah 8, and Thomas 6, Grace stood on her porch one morning watching her family. Travis was in the corral with William, teaching him the finer points of horse training. Sarah was in the garden, carefully tending her own small plot of vegetables. Thomas was helping by digging holes wherever he pleased. Grace's hair was showing threads of silver now, and there were lines around her eyes. She'd earned every one of them through hard work, laughter, and the occasional tear, but she'd never been happier. "Mama," Thomas called. "Look what I found." He held up a worm, delighted with his discovery. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Grace called back. "But the worm needs to go back in the ground so it can do its job." Thomas carefully returned the worm to the earth, then immediately started digging another hole. Grace shook her head, smiling. Her youngest was definitely the most adventurous of her children. Travis noticed her on the porch and waved. She waved back, and he said something to William before heading her way. "Penny for your thoughts," he said as he climbed the steps. "I was just thinking about time," Grace said. "How fast it goes, how much has changed. 13 years since you rode up to tell me about my broken fence. 13 years that feel like both forever and no time at all." Travis put his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one," Grace leaned into him. "Well, maybe one. I regret the time I wasted being afraid. All those months where I fought against what I felt for you because I was too scared to take a chance. You weren't wasting time. You were healing. There's a difference." Travis kissed her temple. "And anyway, we got here eventually. That's what matters." "We did." Grace watched William successfully guide a young horse through a series of turns. Her eldest son was growing up, would be a man before she knew it. "He's good with the horses, takes after his father. He's got your stubbornness, though. Won't give up on anything once he sets his mind to it." Travis's voice was warm with pride. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their children play. This, Grace thought, was everything she'd never known she wanted. Not the grand passion of storybooks, but something better, a partnership built on mutual respect, trust earned through consistent action, love that deepened and strengthened with each passing year. "I'm glad you fixed my fence," she said suddenly. Travis laughed. "Me too. Best decision I ever made, stopping to help a suspicious woman with a rifle." "I was not that suspicious." "You absolutely were. You looked like you wanted to shoot me just for breathing your air." Grace couldn't deny it. "Well, you looked like trouble." "I was trouble. Just not the kind you expected." Travis turned her to face him. "You know what I think about sometimes? What would have happened if I'd ridden past that day? If I'd been in too much of a hurry to stop, or if you'd sent me away before I could prove myself?" "Don't think about that," Grace said firmly. "We found each other, that's what matters. We did. And I've spent every day since grateful for it." Travis cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Grace Young, just as much today as I did 13 years ago. More, actually, because now I know exactly how lucky I am." "I love you too." Grace rose on her toes to kiss him. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for proving that some men really do keep their promises. Always, Travis said. That's one promise I'll never break. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they returned to the work of the day. But the moment stayed with Grace, a reminder of how far she'd come and how blessed she was. She'd learned that second chances weren't just possible, they were precious. That trust, once broken, could be rebuilt by someone willing to put in the work. And that love, real love, wasn't about grand gestures or poetic declarations. Real love was fixing fences together. It was patience in the face of fear. It was showing up day after day, proving through actions that promises meant something. It was building a life together, one small decision at a time, until one day you looked around and realized you'd created something beautiful. The years continued their steady march. William grew into a fine young man who eventually took over much of the horse breeding operation. Sarah became a teacher, bringing education to ranch children throughout the territory. Thomas, true to form, became a surveyor, always seeking the next horizon to explore. Grace and Travis grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and long years. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, refined by time into something unshakable. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, their children organized a celebration. The house was full of family: 3 children, their spouses, and 6 grandchildren ranging from infants to teenagers. Friends from town came, and neighbors from surrounding ranches. Even old Martha Hendricks, now ancient but still sharp as a tack, attended. As Grace looked around the crowded room, she felt overwhelming gratitude. This life, this family, this love, she'd almost missed it all. Almost let fear keep her from the greatest joy she'd ever known. Travis found her standing by the window, watching the grandchildren play in the yard. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him, still fitting perfectly after all these years. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Young," he murmured in her ear. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Young." Grace turned in his arms to face him. 30 years. Can you believe it? Some days yes, some days no, but I've loved every minute of it. Travis's eyes, still that same creek water blue, were warm. Even the hard parts, even when we disagreed or struggled. Because we did it together. Together, Grace echoed. That's the secret, isn't it? Not finding someone perfect, but finding someone who'll stay when things get difficult. Someone who'll keep their promises even when it's not easy. Speaking from experience, Travis asked with a smile. Always. Grace kissed him softly. You proved something to me, Travis Young, something I needed desperately to learn. You proved that second chances are real, that trust can be rebuilt, and that some men, rare and wonderful men, are absolutely worth the risk. You took a chance on me, Travis said. A drifter with nothing but his word and a borrowed horse. That took courage. You made it easy. You were patient, you were kind, and you never gave up on me even when I tried to push you away. Grace rested her head on his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. You're the best decision I ever made, even if I fought it tooth and nail at first. Their children called them back to the party then, wanting to cut the anniversary cake. But as they rejoined their family, hands clasped together, Grace carried with her the knowledge that she was truly blessed. She'd been given a second chance at love when she'd thought such things were impossible. She'd been shown that not all men were faithless or selfish, that some men understood the meaning of commitment. And she'd learned that the bravest thing she could do was open her heart again, even knowing the risk. The party continued late into the evening, full of laughter and stories and love. When the guests finally departed and the children had taken the sleeping grandchildren home, Grace and Travis sat on their porch, the same porch where it had all begun so many years ago. "It's been a good life," Grace said softly. "The best," Travis agreed. "And you know what? I think the best is still ahead," Grace laughed. "We're in our 60s, Travis. How much more ahead is there? However much time we're given, and I plan to make the most of every single day." He pulled her closer. "Growing old with you, watching our grandchildren grow, maybe even meeting great-grandchildren someday. That's not an ending, Grace. That's just the next chapter." And so it was. They had many more years together. Years filled with the quiet contentment of a love well earned and faithfully maintained. They watched their children succeed and struggle, supported their grandchildren through various adventures, and eventually welcomed 2 great-grandchildren into the world. When Travis passed in his sleep at age 78, Grace grieved deeply. But even in her grief, she was grateful. Grateful for every day they'd had, every challenge they'd faced together, every moment of joy and sorrow they'd shared. He'd given her 36 years of steadfast love, 36 years of proof that some men really did keep their promises. Grace lived another 5 years, surrounded by family, secure in the knowledge that she'd been deeply loved. On quiet evenings, she'd sit on the porch and remember that first day, a stranger on a chestnut mare, a broken fence, and a heart too wounded to hope. She'd learned that second chances existed, if you were brave enough to take them. That trust, once shattered, could be rebuilt by patient hands and consistent action. And that sometimes, the greatest adventure wasn't riding off to seek your fortune, it was standing still long enough to recognize when fortune rode up to your door. Grace Young passed peacefully in her sleep in 1919, at the age of 60. Her family laid her to rest beside Travis, their graves marked with simple headstones that bore their names, dates, and a single line: "Together, always." The ranch they'd built together stayed in the family for generations, a testament to what 2 people could create when they committed to each other fully. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, folks claimed they could see 2 figures on the old porch, a tall cowboy and a strong woman, sitting side by side, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold. It was just legend, of course. But it was a good legend, a true legend in all the ways that mattered. Because Grace and Travis Young had proven something important. That love wasn't about perfection or ease, but about choosing each other every single day. That second chances were real, if you were brave enough to take them. And that some people, rare and precious, were worth every risk, every fear, every leap of faith. Their story became part of the fabric of Lusk, Wyoming, passed down through generations as an example of what real love looked like. Not the passionate whirlwind of romance novels, but something better, a partnership built on respect, strengthened by trust, and sustained by the daily choice to honor the promises made. And somewhere, in the place where good stories go when they are done being told, Grace and Travis Young were together still, proving that some loves transcend even death, that some bonds can never be broken, and that the best endings are really just new beginnings in disguise.